Hi, this is Tracy Bevington. I'm the owner and founder of Pacific Marriage and Family Therapy Network, a group private practice, and we've got offices in Sherman Oaks, Manhattan Beach, and Santa Monica, and we've got 15 clinicians to help provide services to you. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist myself. Today in our Facebook Live presentation, I'm going to be talking about I'm not depressed. I'm just a little down. So recognizing depression and knowing like when you see it. Well, before we get started, I'd like to ask that if you are new to this Facebook Live or to our Facebook Lives, if you would, in the comment section, let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. That would be great. If you have any comments or questions along the way, please leave your comments or questions. I'm very happy to do my best to try and answer any questions that you have. If I don't get to it before the end of this presentation, I will certainly get back to you shortly. If you're interested in contacting us or being part of our newsletter mailing list, you'll also see a link at the top near our description. So please feel free to contact us and we'd be very, very happy to help you out. So now, also, if you're joining, please take some time to check your sound, make sure that your volume is turned up and your sound is turned up. I believe that these are closed caption, but it's also available with sound. So please check that out. Okay, so first thing I'd like to do is talk about depression and its kind of more common definition. I think that there's a really big misunderstanding about what depression really is, because what we believe depression to be is what we see on television or in movies. It's not always something that we can define in real life. And unfortunately, when you have depression and other kinds of illness portrayed on television, right, it's for drama. So they kind of overdo it a little bit. So I think that some of the common ideas about depression are like, oh, that's for people, you know, like when they sleep too much, or, you know, they're just kind of like grungy and they just don't care. They're eating like constantly, or maybe they're just not eating at all. They're sad and they're crying all the time. They have this like Debbie Downer attitude, and they just kind of seem flat, like they're kind of like dead inside. So that's, I think, what the common definition is. And I think when people imagine what someone that's depressed is, they think of someone that is like needs to be hospitalized, or someone that is like almost like homeless, like their life is just terrible and they've got nothing good going on. And so yes, of course they're depressed. The truth of the matter, or the reality, is that depression is a very serious mental illness, and it varies in severity. There are all different levels of depression, from like depression light to super serious depression, which does require hospitalization and intense care. So to think about depression as just like it's this thing, like that's the person that's depressed, or that's how I know what depression is, that is not taking into account like 75% of all the other like kind of levels of depression that also need treatment and that are causing people to suffer. So like any illness, depression is super treatable if you, or it has the best outcomes when you intervene early. So the earlier you can get involved in treating the depression, the better chance you have of managing it for your life, or maybe even getting rid of it to a certain extent. Depression's one of those things that you never really get rid of. It's kind of like cancer. You know, once you have cancer, it's you never really get rid of it, because then after you have the treatment, if you're like kind of cancer free, you still have your body trying to recover from the radiation and from all these other interventions. And so you're never really the same. It's kind of like that with depression. Once you have depression, it's treatable, but it always kind of lingers. There's always something there. So you have to be on top of it. Otherwise, if you have the depression and you get really, great treatment and you're doing well, but then you kind of lay off of it, you can absolutely go into another depression. And it could be a really deep and dark one. So understanding that depression is actually really common. I bet everybody out there that's watching this has been depressed at some point in their life, or maybe is even depressed now, or has been depressed their whole life, but not to the point where they need to be hospitalized, or you need some kind of major intervention. So for a lot of people, depression starts when you're just a kid. When we're kids, we're trying to figure out how to be in the world. We're trying to figure out what it means to be a person, what is safe, what's not safe, how should I behave in these situations, how should I behave in those situations. We're learning a lot about what it means to be a person and developing into what it means to be me. And that is a time when we see a lot of depression developing, because depression is, well, it's something that is really hard to notice until it's out of control in a lot of, especially if you're looking at it from one person looking at some other person that's depressed. It's hard to see depression in another person unless you're really well trained in it. And sometimes it's really hard to notice it in yourself because it's secretive. We don't like to let people know that we're not feeling good. It's much easier to go to work or go to school and just kind of be who people want you to be, while on the inside, you're suffering terribly. That's kind of what depression is. I have had the luxury of having a supervisor in my career that I love very much. And she once told me, probably more than once, that depression is like anger that gets turned inward. Depression is an inside kind of a suffering. It's kind of like, when something happens, people with depression will take that and often turn it in and make it some kind of a poison for themselves. So everything kind of comes in and it's not kind. It just comes in and it fills you up with all of these things that are not kind. And then while it's in there, it starts churning and turning in on itself. It's like being stuck in the gears of a clock, right? So you're getting chewed up by this gear, and then you get pushed over into that gear, and you're just getting chewed up. And clocks don't usually, I guess, unless it runs out of batteries or something, but clocks can go on infinitely because the gears just keep spinning and they keep spinning. So depression is like being stuck in the gears of a clock, and you just keep churning everything to the inside, and your inside hurts terribly. So when we think about depression, the more you get chewed up, the bigger your depression gets. Depression is, it's a very sad place to be, but that does not mean that you're going to be crying every day. It's like an internal suffering. So it's hard to see in somebody else if they're suffering internally, but there are signs. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So Before we get into like the signs and some of these other things, I do want to just kind of reintroduce in case people are joining us late. We're talking about depression. We've talked about the common definition. We've talked about what the kind of reality of the definition is, or kind of what it feels like to be depressed, or yeah, what the depression experience is. And then we're going to talk more about like what depression really is, like clinically. So again, I'm Tracy Bevington. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist, and I'm the owner of a group practice called Pacific Marriage and Family Therapy Network. If you are joining us, please, in the comments, let us know that you're here with us and where you're joining us from. If you have any questions or comments about what you're hearing, or you'd like to hear more, please leave the comments and I will get back to you, hopefully, if I can, within this presentation, but definitely afterwards. I will definitely respond. And if you would like to contact me or any of our clinicians at Pacific MFT Network, there is a link at the top of the page where you can join our newsletter mailing list, and you can also contact us. If you're just joining us, please don't forget to check your sound. Make sure your sound and your volume are turned up. And yes, I think that's about it. So we've talked about how the things that happen in our life when we are depressed, we put them through a filter that then comes inside of us and is really negative. It's very critical. It is not kind. So what are the signs, or what is depression then? I mean, we discussed how it feels, but what are these signs? How do I know if my partner or spouse is depressed? Oh my gosh, how do I know if my child is depressed? The number one identifier is a loss of interest. So a loss of interest or pleasure in things that you would usually find pleasurable. So if you really like running, and for some time you're just like, oh, I'm just not feeling it. No, I think I'm going to skip today. And that goes on for a period of time. That could be a sign of depression. Someone that is more tired, because being depressed is very taxing on our nervous system. It's very taxing on our body. So sometimes you need more sleep. Sometimes you actually get less sleep because in addition to the depression, you have a little bit of anxiety and worry, which is like the double whammy, but it's very common. So you may see somebody that's more tired. And sometimes that tired is actually connected to this lack of interest. There's also often a desire to isolate. Sometimes people will actually isolate, and then it's more clear. But a lot of times it's just a desire to isolate. So this desire to isolate, sometimes you can't really see it because people are like powering through. They're trying to kind of show the world that they're okay. They're trying to be who they are supposed to be. And so the desire to isolate is another strong indicator, but it's hard to see. Another thing is poor eating. So if you're emotionally eating too much, or you're restricting to kind of find more like kind of control over yourself, those are two pretty huge indicators. Sometimes depressed people, or one of the signs is like having fits of overwhelm. Because everything is coming in and being held in, the only way to release is to like have a tantrum, is to like lose it one day. Oftentimes it looks like anger. It is anger. Sometimes it's like having a short temper or being short and like snippy. that might be kind of a little bit more out of character. Sometimes it's a sensitivity, like being sensitive. Like when you're really full, let's say you have zero, like your normal bandwidth is about this wide. And when you're depressed, you're holding on to so much that your bandwidth starts getting like squished down and it's paper thin. When you have paper thin bandwidth, you get more sensitive because you don't have the resource to be resilient. So the sensitivity could mean crying. It could mean anger. It could mean like giving into sadness. It could mean be just feeling more emotional. Also, one of the signs is an impulsivity. So the impulsivity can come in, in its most dangerous form. It's when people contemplate taking their life. They contemplate suicide. That is incredibly impulsive. Also, impulsivity in like eating, or impulsivity in like, well, I'm not feeling so good, so I'm gonna go shopping and spend a bunch of money, but then you still don't really feel good. Or maybe it's impulsively like trying to get out of town. So the impulsivity also is because of this like really thin bandwidth, that ideas and things, it's like a desperation. The impulsivity is more like a desperation. You'll also see other bad habits kind of spike. So drinking, smoking, any other kind of like drugs. Maybe it's like coffee. Maybe it's chocolate. Like any kind of bad habit usually starts to happen more often. There's also a difference between identifying signs of depression for a teenager versus an adult. Oftentimes with the teenager, it is the anger, it's a frustration, it is a feeling of not being understood or not understanding what's going on themselves, and because they don't have the experience, and taking it out on everybody else. That's not to say that every angry teen is depressed, but it's a possibility. So what makes this, again, really difficult is that depression is very internal. So, man, the longer someone is depressed, the better they get at being functionally depressed, which means that they are really good at hiding it and they're really good at faking it. So this is not something easy to recognize when you're depressed. To recognize when others are depressed is not easy. But we've got to start somewhere. So take some time to think about what you feel like. What are the feelings that you're having? What kind of bandwidth do you have? Do you have this paper thin bandwidth, or do you have a nice thick and heavy bandwidth? Have you found a loss of interest in things? Do you feel more tired? Do you feel like you just want to be alone? Do you feel like you don't want to be around people or go out? Or sometimes, when you're really depressed, you don't want to like take a shower. You don't want to change your clothes. It seems like so much like, oh, I'll just skip brushing my teeth. Now, all of these things taken out of context, I mean, everybody's been there, right? Everybody's been there. So am I saying everybody's depressed? No, I'm not. But there is a point where it kind of crosses the line, where you can have moments of depression and come out of it perfectly fine. But when you find yourself or others having more and more of these moments of depression, then maybe it is time to think of it as more of an issue. When I think about clients that come in that have depression, a lot of them don't want to recognize that it's depression. Like for some reason, like that's a super bad and terrible thing to say, like, I'm depressed, or to own that you are depressed. They come in and for some reason, anxiety, everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm anxious. Because that's like stressed. And if you're stressed, you're working hard and you're doing something. But to be depressed is almost like that means you're lazy. And lazy is no good. Unfortunately, right, that's kind of what it's like in our culture. That's how people think about it. But when we switch things around and start thinking about depression as like it's an illness, it's like you caught a cold, right? Depression light is when you have a cold and you do a couple of things and everything's fine. And then you can get a flu. What happens when you get a flu? Sometimes you need to go to the doctor and get antibiotics. It's the same thing. When your depression starts to ramp up, sometimes you need to go to the doctor and get, maybe it's antidepressant medication, or maybe it's just coming in and talking to a therapist. That's your medicine. Now, what happens when it ramps up into, I don't know, pneumonia? What if it starts ramping up into some kind of like an autoimmune problem? What if it starts ramping up into something chronic like, I don't know, something chronic? Then what? Is it because it's depression, you just let it go? Like, no, that's fine. I can handle it. So if you have fibromyalgia, do you say, oh yeah, it's good. I got this. I know I can handle it. I know what to do. I don't need medication. I don't need to see a doctor. It's all good. I know what to do. I can handle it. Chances are the answer to that is no, right? So let's say like severe depression is like, it's like having cancer. Severe depression. So if someone has severe depression or someone has cancer and somebody told you, oh, like, oh my gosh, all these tests and everything, and it really looks like you have cancer. And actually, maybe it's like small. Okay, let's say the doctor says, you know what, it's super small. Why don't we just like let it go? Do you think you'd be like, all right, sure, I have cancer. I'm just going to let that go? Probably not. You're going to get a second opinion. You're going to do something about it. So why is that different, any different from depression? That can also lead to, in some cases, death. Depression can lead to death if it's untreated and if it becomes serious enough. So why is it that for a teeny tiny spot of cancer, we will jump through hoops and do whatever we need to do? But when we start to feel depressed and we have that depression lingering for months, years, decades, we don't want to do anything about it. So the moral of this whole story, sorry, now that I brought everybody down, the moral of this story is I just want people to understand that depression is a real thing and that it feels horrible to the person that is experiencing it. It is like it's suffering. So please don't suffer. Please don't allow your loved ones to suffer. Let's intervene just like we would with cancer. Let's make some changes and do things differently so that we can all be healthy and happy. So now I'm off my depression high horse. But I thank you very much for being with me today. Once again, I'm Tracy Bevington. marriage family therapist and the owner and founder of Pacific Marriage and Family Therapy Network. I really appreciate you being with me today, and I want to again remind you, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. I will get back to you. If you'd like to join our newsletter, please click on the link above. If you'd like to contact us or contact me, please click on the link above and reach out. Our next Facebook Live is scheduled for next Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, and I'm going to be talking about telehealth. I haven't thought of the title yet, but I'm going to be talking about how getting therapy over the phone or over Skype or over Facebook or any kind of therapy is helpful. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific.